give opening remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Arlene. Ladies and gentlemen, as you would have heard just now, Dr. Arlene holds the position of Vice President, Quality Assurance and Institutional Effectiveness at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Arlene, as some of you may know, is also a former president of CANCAIT and has been an avid supporter of and exemplary contributor to the network over the years. She is also well known and respected in the area of quality assurance and tertiary education in the Caribbean and beyond. And Dr. Arlene also holds the position of Vice Chair of the Board of Directors of the Accreditation Council of Trinidad and Tobago, as well as she served as Chairman of the Board of the National Training Agency in Trinidad and Tobago. And Dr. Arlene, we are indeed honored and privileged to have someone of your caliber accepting to moderate this evening's session. Ladies and gentlemen and colleagues in education, welcome and Happy New Year to you. I recall in December of 2020, alerting you that we intend to resume our webinar series early in 2021 with another topic of interest, which will be presented by an esteemed and prominent figure from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We wanted to start off with a bang, not envisaging at the time that the Soufriere volcano in St. Vincent wanted to get in on the action. Now, I don't mean to make light of the situation, but just to assure our colleagues in St. Vincent and the Grenadines that the rest of the Caribbean community have you in our hearts and our thoughts and prayers as we continue to monitor the situation. We are all in this together. Education is often referred to as the key to success. While we ponder on the challenges we all faced in the past and continue to grapple with in these COVID times as individual Caribbean states, there is the assurance that as a region, our strength is in our diversity. There are many distinguished persons among us from whom we and the rest of the world can learn. Through the intervention of Ms. Decima Alexander and her colleagues at the National Accreditation Board of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we are therefore doubly blessed and truly honored to have this esteemed, astute, internationally renowned, and much anticipated presenter in the person of Dr. the Honorable Ralph Gonsalves, accepting the invitation to share his many years of experience and wisdom on this evening's topic, which I'm certain will stimulate our thoughts and prompt a healthy discourse. So without further ado, I now defer the proceedings to Dr. Rosalind Ambrose, Chairman of the National Accreditation Board of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, to introduce this evening's honorable presenter.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President. And good evening to Madam Chair, Prime Minister, and good evening to all ladies and gentlemen who've joined us. On behalf of the National Accreditation Board of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I wish to welcome you to this third webinar in the series hosted by CANCAIT in collaboration with the National Accreditation Board of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It is a great pleasure and my honor to introduce our speaker, who will present the topic, Advancing the Caribbean Narrative of Strength in Diversity, the role of quality higher education. Dr. Honorable Ralph Gonsalves was born, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, was born on August 8th, 1946 to Alban Giles and Teresa Francis in Connery, a rural village in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Prime Minister Gonsalves is married to Eloise Gonsalves, née Harris, and has 3 sons, Camilo, Adam, and Storm, and 2 beautiful daughters, Isis and Soleil. Dr. Gonsalves was educated in St. Vincent and the Grenadines at the Connery Roman Catholic School and at the St. Vincent Boys Grammar School. He later completed a bachelor's degree in economics at the University of the West Indies, there obtaining several noteworthy accolades, including President of the Debating Society and President of the Guild of Undergraduates. In 1971, he obtained a master's in government from the University of the West Indies. In 1974 and 1981, he obtained a PhD in government and a degree of Utter Barrister at the University of Manchester, England, and Graves Inn, London, respectively. Dr. Gonsalves became the deputy political leader of the Unity Party in 1994. The ULP, a merger of the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Labour Party, and the NMU, the Movement for National Unity, a political party which at the time of the merger, Dr. Gonsalves was the leader and won the St. Vincent and the Grenadines general elections held on March 28, 2001. At the time of the elections, Dr. Gonsalves had since been elected to political leader of the ULP, and as such, he became the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines on that same date of March 28, 2001. He remained Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines since then, winning the elections again in December 2005, 2010, 2015, and in 2020. Concurrently, while pursuing his political career, prior to his becoming the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. Gonsalves practiced law extensively and successfully before the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court in a wide range of matters, but particularly in the fields of constitutional law, administrative law, matrimonial law, real property law, law of tort general, and law of contract. Throughout legal and political career, Dr. Gonsalves has researched, written, and published extensively on a range of matters touching upon the Caribbean, Africa, communism, comparative political economy, and developmental issues generally. Among his latest publications are History and the Future, A Caribbean Perspective, 1994, The Politics of Our Caribbean Civilization, Essays and Speeches in 2001, The Making of the Comrade, A Political Journey of Ralph Gonsalves in 2010, Diary of a Prime Minister, 10 Days Among Benedictine Monks in 2010, The Case of the Caribbean Reparatory Justice in 2014, Our Caribbean and Global Insecurity in 2017, The Making of a National Hero, Law and Practice in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in 2018, The Political Economy of the Labor Movement in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in 2019, and the trial of George McIntosh and the 1935 uprising in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in 2020. Madam Chair, Mr. President of CANCAID, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. the Honorable Ralph E. Gonsalves.
Thank you very much. I want to acknowledge Madam Chairperson and all my brothers and sisters and comrades from our Caribbean civilization. I'm honored and privileged to have been asked by the Caribbean Area Network for Quality Assurance in Tertiary Education and the National Accreditation Board of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to join in your conversation on the dialectical interplay between our Caribbean's diversity on the one hand and quality, accessible, affordable education, post-secondary and tertiary on the other. This fascinating, uplifting process is thus under interrogation of the ways in which our rich diversity of peoples and national identities in our Caribbean engenders inclusive and quality higher education. And that very education itself bolsters our diversity, yet oneness in the building of a productive, ennobling whole. Central to our discourses is the interconnectedness in all its contradictions and complexities of our Caribbean civilization and higher education in quest of a much better life and living for our people in our landscape and seascape, nationally and regionally, and as global citizens. Diversity and higher education thus have a higher or optimal purpose for our people to be the best we can for ourselves and humanity, confident in the realization that although we are not better than anyone, no one is better than us. Inevitably, I begin with reflections on education and our Caribbean civilization. I consider that education for our Caribbean has four central purposes. First, to train critical minds to receive and transmit universal culture, including science and technology, but with a foundational Caribbean particularity. Secondly, to train our populations with the necessary and desirable skills for our many-sided production apparatuses in goods and services, which are the material foundations for the reasonable pursuit of a quality life and living and happiness. Thirdly, to develop rounded personalities steeped in tried and tested, uplifting and ennobling values of our Caribbean civilization without the debilitating baggage of yesteryears. And fourthly, to connect our Caribbean civilization and in the process, help to construct a binding nexus with our civilizations, globally grounded in a mature multilateralism beneficial to all humanity. Such an educational process is carried out in fit-for-purpose educational institutions and in the society, economy, and polity through a bundle of formal and non-formal institutions and processes, including those for continuing education. One set of educational institutions are those which focus on post-secondary and tertiary education, what we call together higher education. We in this Caribbean occupy a particular geographic space which has often been more influential in determining our beings than our history, which admittedly itself has had a profound effect on shaping who we are as individuals, communities, nation states, and civilization. We know that the possibilities and limitations contained in both our geography and history jostle dialectically in their complexities, diversities, interconnectedness, and their contradictions. Our very nature, inclusive of our geography and our history, at one and the same time summon and provide a catalyst for a higher education and serious research. Our anthropology, our history, our culture, our geography and demography our politics and governance, our economy and livelihoods, our social formations and lives, and every aspect of our interconnection with nature, ourselves, and others, demand a particular focus in a higher education of inclusiveness, quality, affordability, and accessibility. In a typology of civilizations, our own is of a small island and seaboard type. It is distinct, for instance, from continental civilizations. It has no history of imperium except as a victim of a dominant empire from a European civilization that has yanked our region away from a trajectory of autochthonous or homegrown development into a vortex of stunted and uneven development through the phases of mercantile, industrial, and monopoly capitalism driven by Europe and later by the United States of America. The process has delivered upon our Caribbean native genocide, the enslavement of Africans, indentureship of Portuguese, Indian, and Chinese arrivals, the common law, parliamentary democracy and independent judiciary, a professional public service, and the European language, English, French, Spanish, or Dutch, which we have fashioned as our own. Through the fever of our history, its pain and suffering, its joys and triumphs, our civilization has been shaped and altered from a condition of cultural pluralism, underpinned by coercion and European cultural dominance, to a creolized society of consensual democracy, despite heterogeneous ethnic and political dissonances and some distasteful Euro-American mimicry still to be exorcised as ghosts from the past. Of course, fresh challenges arise from modern globalization and the insidious process of an imposed cultural homogeneity of the new empire and its digital colonialism. In the process, our Caribbean, despite all its challenges and weaknesses, has arrived at a particular contemporary juncture of having solved more or less ethnic intolerance and unresponsive and irresponsible gubernatorial governance of the old days. Still, other divisions based on class, tribalism, gender, and unequal access to material resources have taken on altered forms of varying intensity. So too the corruption of political democracy by some who cherish governor-style overrule of the ancien regime, or to put up for sale the very soul of our nations, including their patrimony, passports, and citizenship, the veritable sacraments of nationhood. Higher education must interrogate all these positives and negatives, possibilities and limitations, and deepen our understanding in quest of enhanced lives, living, and production. These very dissonances, diversities, and complexities fuel a legitimate demand for more and better higher education and research. The contemporary drivers of conflict and challenges in our Caribbean demand our education to focus ever more on climate change, hurricanes, droughts, volcanoes, and our ecology generally, on applied science and technology, on music and the arts, on modern communication systems and their content, on teaching and learning, on criminal violence and pandemics, on our civilization's ways of living and dying, in our attitudes towards women and children, on patriarchy and its discontents, old people and strangers, enemies and allies, on our society's visible sides and their submerged invisible side, to borrow the language of the Mexican Nobel laureate Octavio Paz. Most importantly, our higher education has to find answers to the challenges which hold back too many of our people from having a settled sense of permanence of being in and commitment to our Caribbean landscape and seascape and nationhood, which goes beyond childhood or teenage nostalgia, contrived energy, will, or even creative power. This calls for a profound Caribbean philosophy and theology, which takes us over the existing boundaries of ordinary recitation of received ideas and pious incantations, and a leadership which is unafraid to lose power, which fundamentally and truthfully is an illusion generally, and particularly so in our context. In short, to go beyond vanity, vainglory, short-term mirages, noises, and the bubble of uninformed and fake voices, parading as wisdom and knowledge, yet to do so without arrogance and conceit. In other words, to do so with love for and commitment to our people, with social solidarity, and with as much selflessness as human beings can reasonably and practically muster. This is a tall order with which a higher education must help in providing leadership in humility, and which in turn provides the catalyst for further education, higher education itself. Universal access to primary education came to our Caribbean in the 2 decades or so after the anti-colonial uprisings of the mid to late 1930s. And in early years of universal adult suffrage and constitutional decolonization. I think someone is has to mute their mic. Universal secondary education evolved unevenly in the post-independence period and has been more or less achieved. Universal access to quality, affordable tertiary education is still an elusive goal, though much progress has been made in the last 20 or so years. Yet there is much, much more to be done in this regard. Interestingly, the leaders of the anti-colonial uprisings in the 1930s made the demand for a university for the Anglo-Caribbean to educate and train not only the proverbial talented 1/10, but more broadly, the children of the poor, the working people, and the peasantry of all ethnicities, classes, and individual territories. Various submissions to the Moyne Commission of 1938 to 1939, but which reported after the war in 1945, made this call for a regional university with crystal clarity. The bulk of the working people and peasantry who supported their leaders in this visionary quest did not finish primary school, but they knew that the possibilities of a tertiary education was vital for the advancement of their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and for the sustainable development of our Caribbean civilization. By 1948, the University College of the West Indies, linked umbilically to the University of London, was founded. In 1963, it metamorphosed as the University of the West Indies, with its own institutional and functional independence. The most significant fact, in my view, about the regional university's founding is that it was born out of solidarity between national leaders and the broad mass of people arising through anti-colonial and social democratic struggles. With this popular solidarity, without this popular solidarity, it is unlikely that the British colonialists would have facilitated the university's establishment. And without the achievement of universal adult suffrage, the increasing devolution of political authority in the process of constitutional decolonization, and finally, the attainment of political independence from 1962 onwards. Without these things, the growth, expansion, and development of our University of the West Indies would not have happened. Our university's expansion and decentralization today, with 5 campuses in Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Antigua and Barbuda, and the Open Campus, have been inextricably bound up with constitutional decolonization, political independence, a mature regionalism made manifest in the Caribbean Community CARICOM in the period from 1973 to the present time. The ongoing quest to build a modern, competitive, many-sided post-colonial economy, which is at once national, regional, and global, and the determination to develop and advance and ennoble further our Caribbean civilization and its linkages with the rest of the global family of civilizations and nations. Among other things, all this means that the numerous entrants to our regional university over the years found places there, not because of their brightness, but more importantly, because a profound solidarity between our peoples of all classes, ethnicities, and individual territorial nationalities divined the university into existence. This is a profound difference between the University of the West Indies and other national, private, or church-based universities, which have sprung up subsequent to UWI's original establishment. Indeed, several thousands of students who have entered UWI since 1948 would not have been able to attend a university in North America, Europe, or elsewhere because of the prohibitive costs of these possible alternatives. In any event, the education elsewhere would have been, and still is, devoid of the focus of our Caribbean civilization. So the students and graduates of UWI ought never to forget that their higher education has had its origin in an existential solidarity, which solidarity persists amidst all our diversities of ethnic, class, gender, or national origin. Those who reject or fail to acknowledge in practice this fundamental cornerstone of solidarity and extol their individual brightness miss 2 critical considerations. First, the enthronement of a pristine individualism, which eschews social solidarity, leads one inexorably to a debilitating alienation from self and from society. This idea of an atomized individual stands in contrast to a more ennobling social individual. Secondly, the individual chest-thumping brightness misunderstands that there are 2 types of brightness, one which blinds and the other which illuminates. The latter is only truly available and made manifest through social solidarity and our civilization's further advancement. I want to tell you a personal story of the journey we have traveled from a shackled civilization of yesteryear to one of enhanced possibilities of today because of tertiary education in the context of the magnificent Vincentian component of our Caribbean civilization. About 2 months ago, I attended a call to the bar of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court St. Vincent and Grenadines jurisdiction in Kingstown of a 24-year-old young lady who had excelled as a student with first-class honors in law from UWI and being an honors roll graduate from the Hugh Whitney Law School. Upon her call to the bar, and in exercising her right of audience in the Supreme Court, the young barrister of law was reading her presentation, her speech, from her laptop. I closed my eyes as she spoke. My mind flashed back to her great-grandmother, a beautiful, intelligent, dignified, poor woman of African and Indian ancestry from my rural home village of Connery who had not finished her primary education. She was one of the women in the village who helped to raise me and socialize me. I saw through the mind's eye of this boy and a young man named Ralph, this great-grandmother in the fields of the Connery estate digging our root with a 5p hoe. I saw her in the evening after her day-long toils, sitting on the step of her boathouse with a thatched roof in a colorful dress made of cheap trilele. Trilele is a kind of cheap cloth of those days. The older folk may remember it. Smoking her chalk pipe with substandard tobacco, talking to me. The contrast in my head was striking. The young barrister with her laptop in the Supreme Court in the year 2020. Her great-grandmother in the fields with her 5p hoe in the 1950s and 1960s. The young barrister with elegant clothing and her gown. Her great-grandmother in her trilele frock. The journey of this profound change in circumstances is instructive. The great-grandmother was in her early 20s at the time of the 1935 anti-colonial uprising. One of the three central locations in that epic struggle was less than 2 miles up the road from my village. In 2001, the young barrister, in 2020, the young barrister is in a free and independent country. In its first year as a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, the smallest country ever to be elected by the UN General Assembly to the Security Council by a majority of 185 votes to 6 and 2 abstentions in a competitive election. In 2001, that young lady was not yet 5 years old. She didn't go to primary school when I came to office in the year 2001. We launched our education revolution. That young barrister was a child and is a child of the education revolution. The great-grandmother to whom I referred had many children. One of these was the young barrister's grandfather. He was a driver for the Banana Growers Association. His son, the young barrister's father, is a technical supervisor at the state-owned marina and shipyard in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. At the call of the young barrister, no one remembered her great-grandmother, and none mentioned her father. Clearly, despite all the advances we have made, we still do not yet learn to have a proper memory. Higher education is important in making us have that memory. Clearly, there has been an inexorable progress in this family from our root plantation to the Supreme Court. Discipline, intelligence, and hard work in the family have been major contributors to this success story. But without social and political solidarity, the journey would have been far more problematic. When we came to office in 2001, from the very outset, 2 of the aims of our education revolution were universal access to secondary education. In 2001, only 39% of the 12-year-olds were at secondary school. Within 4.5 years, we had 100% of the 12-year-olds at secondary school. And the second aim was that of greatly enhance access to post-secondary and tertiary education. By 2020, we had increased access to post-secondary education by nearly 6 times, and university enrollment by a similar number. We are on course to achieve our target of 1 higher education graduate per household on an average by the year 2030. There are over 40,000 households in our country. Almost 20% of my country's recurrent budget is spent on education. Higher education is being funded in a bundle of creative ways, including our economically disadvantaged student loan program, which was hailed by a former vice chancellor of UWI as a best practice. The education revolution for my government and for me personally is not just a policy. It is a transformative strategic initiative of the highest order in family, social, and economic terms. It is to a passion pursued with unwavering commitment. Without UWI, it is unlikely that I would have attended university. And if I did so, I am sure that I would have been a different person and not necessarily better. I was the first person in my family to attend university. My 4 parents arrived in St. Vincent and the Grenadines as indentured servants in November 1845, recruited to work in the plantations in the years after the emancipation of slaves. My mother completed her primary education. My father did not. He left primary school at the age of 11 years to work on a plantation. I attended the primary school in my village, set up by the Roman Catholic Church. In January 1959, I secured a place at the St. Vincent Boys Grammar School in my competitive examinations. Only 30 boys entered the grammar school in my year. British colonialism had established suzerainty in my country since 1763. Over the next 200 or so years, the British built 2 secondary schools, 1 for boys and 1 for girls, 1 for each 100 years of colonialism. And they tell me about the good old days. My school, my secondary school, was a timber school. If I did not get into the grammar school, more than likely I would have been a small farmer. Hopefully a damn good small farmer. Or I would have gone away to do what? I know not. Today, teenagers and young adults have their eyes fixed on college or university education. In my day, a popular ambition was merely to go away. When you met someone after they finished secondary school and you asked them, what are you going to do? Invariably, the answer was, I'm going away. I'm going away. Going away to do what? You don't know, but you're going away. I entered the Faculty of Social Sciences of UWI, Mona, Jamaica, in October 1966, a mere 18 years after the founding of the University College of the West Indies. The rest is a story not relevant for our purposes, save and except to say that I consider that the education revolution, initiated, consolidated, and expanded over the past 20 years under my prime ministership continuously, to be my single greatest accomplishment in the socio-economic transformation of my country, a process which is still underway. We have opened the gates of education for all to pass through. And everyone, especially the children of the poor and the working people and the peasantry, particularly the young women, have boarded the education train. Historically, economists and policymakers have conceived our region's development with, among other things, and in terms of unlimited supplies of cheap labor. Today, in the transformation of our region's economy, development can only truly take place with unlimited supplies of knowledge and skills. We have to move away from a mode of economic organization based on unlimited supplies of cheap labor to one of unlimited supplies of knowledge and skills. This is the material base for the further enhancement and ennoblement of our Caribbean civilization. A civilization of uniqueness, authenticity, and nobility, and which possesses a trajectory for further development and ennoblement. One of the phenomenal developments in higher education in the CARICOM member countries over the past 20 or so years has been the veritable explosion of enrollment by women. Currently at post-secondary institutions and at universities in the region, women constitute some 70% of the student population. This is very much so in respect of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. In some traditionally male professions like medicine and law, women increasingly preponderate. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the legal fraternity is now an anachronism. It is largely today a sorority, not a fraternity. This process of advancement in our country by women at universities and professional education bodies has been caused by the policies which underpin the education revolution. This advancement of professional women is evident too in the state administration of our country. Most of the permanent secretaries and heads of departments are women. I tell you, in my ministry, in the office of the Prime Minister, and where I'm also the Minister of National Security here at the center of the government, there are only 2 men working here beside me. Everybody else is a woman. There is a junior clerk who is a male, and the senior women, including the permanent secretary and the 2 permanent secretaries here who are women. Every year, they ask me to keep on Mr. Lowe. Mr. Lowe he has gone past retirement age. He's an office attendant. And when they ran out of excuses last year, I said, but it's time for Mr. Lowe to go home. And their clinching argument to me was, Prime Minister, you must allow Mr. Lowe to stay on because we need him for gender balance. That is where I am now. He retired. He retired. Office attendant is required at my office for gender balance. In the diplomatic corps, women preponderate. At our United Nations mission, over 80% of the staff are women, including the 3 who hold ambassadorial positions, one of whom is the permanent representative to the United Nations. Indeed, most of the staff by far who are on the Security Council team are women, a historic mission led by women. Can you imagine this? A young woman of 30 years old, a young man of 30 years old, sitting at the United Nations Security Council with ambassadors from the permanent 5, from the United States, Russia, China, France, and Britain, delivering a position of St. Vincent and the Grenadines on matters touching on war and peace and global security and insecurity. It's an amazing phenomenon. It could only have happened with education, higher education, conjoined with other things. But without higher education of quality over the last 20 years, this would not have been possible. The rise of professional women has an undoubted symbiotic relationship with post-secondary and tertiary education. In the process too, matrifocal households existing in a pre-existing patriarchal distribution of power in families, the society and political economy are being transformed in a manner which subverts that patriarchy and extols a desirable gender equality in the family and society at large. There is some way to go still in redressing patriarchy successfully, but undoubtedly, university, professional and technical education has facilitated, even propelled, the breakdown of a veritable patriarchal Babylon. University education is an expensive enterprise. Thus, more creative ways, including virtual teaching and learning, must be found to do much more with less and to devise financing models which are affordable and sustainable. Value for money, higher education comes on the agenda simultaneously with the issue of financing, access, quality, and affordability. These and other connected questions are for another discourse. I want to thank you very much for listening to me. God bless you.
Dr. Gonzalez, you've given us a history lesson in addition to a lot to reflect on in terms of the movements through the region in education over the years. I'm now going to invite questions from participants. We have approaching 80, we have 78 participants online with us now. That's very good for this time of the evening. And so I'm going to invite questions. You can put your question in the chat, or you can raise your hand, or you can submit the question by email as well. We'll be checking all the reports. And while we wait for the first question to come in, perhaps we could.
We have
Yes?
a raised hand from Anna Perkins in the chat. A raised hand from Anna.
Good evening, Dr. Perkins. Would you proceed with your question?
Good evening. Thank you very much to Prime Minister Gonzalez for his presentation. It was really enlightening, and there was so much there. I just had one question. Is it possible, and this is the takeaway that I'm getting, it might not be what the Prime Minister intended at all, but is it possible for us to see higher education in the Caribbean as disenfranchising men, particularly as you have made the case for how it has done so much for women in the context of St. Vincent and the Grenadines? So I'd love to have the Prime Minister's comment on that. Thank you so much.
The question you have posed is one which has been occupying the thoughts of, I'm sure, Dr. Perkins herself and educators and leaders in all fields across the region. It's a complex issue, and we have to begin to have some very special measures to ensure that more men, more young men come forward in technical professional fields at the level of higher education. What I think has been happening is that a lot of the more talented young men have been using, many of them have been taking a business path or some other own account path towards their own development. Some of them consciously do that. I don't think it is really that the young men are slackers, because I don't see that. I see a number of young men involved in music, the arts, in small businesses, in creative work of one kind or the other. I've seen a couple of them getting involved in more scientific farming. One of the questions we need to ask is whether the universities provide a sufficiently wide enough kind of syllabus to deliver value to some of these young men who want something very different. And that is a question which I think educators and policymakers have to ask. But I think we have to, at the same time, put some, I'm not talking about affirmative action for men, for young men, but we have to do more encouraging. There are some persons who say that there is a general move in Western civilization towards the quote-unquote emasculation of men. I don't subscribe to that particular thesis because I don't see the emasculation taking place. But women see opportunities here. Young women see opportunities here to move, to advance, and their hunger for them. You know, historically, in my family, and I want to say this, Dr. Perkins, I want to, like many of us, our mothers fathered us. I had a very good father, but my mother fathered me. And my mother pushed me into educational pursuits. She hadn't gone to secondary school, but she saw the value of it. And there was no way of resisting it. I have a son, one of my sons, my last son. When he had finished secondary school, he said, look, I don't want to go to university. I want to go into business. He said, I have my math skills. I have English. I do very well. I have good IT skills. I want to get out and start to do something and work. And I said to him, I said, no, you have to go to university. It doesn't matter what you study. I say you can do anthropology, you can do philosophy, anything. Just being among your colleagues of your age, you bounce off ideas, you make friendships and so on and so forth. And I think we have to do a lot of this. But I think it's important that the balance had to be redressed, because in an earlier epoch, you know what was the attitude of a lot of parents, a lot of people. You know, the one particular view was that, you know, you're very young, you must be pregnant, barefoot, and in the kitchen. Well, those are no longer viable propositions. So it's a complex issue. And I've only scratched some of the many elements in it. But we can't blame the young men. I'm not going that road at all. But we have to facilitate them. And we have to make sure that we have offerings, subject offerings, which facilitate, which help them in their own career pursuits.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. And we can take another question. We have a few minutes still. Dr. Wheatley, is there anyone else putting forward a question at this time?
No, there was a little girl, but I am not seeing an adult with her.
Perhaps I can use this opportunity to pose a question. Dr. Gonzalez, you spoke about the solidarity between leaders and people, which gave birth to the movement towards our first university, our Indigenous university. Have we as a Caribbean people leveraged that solidarity sufficiently to advance the regional agenda, integration agenda?
I don't think so. I don't think so at all. You know, there is as you know, perhaps better than I do, the rise of Thatcherism and Reaganism, which provided the intellectual and power foundation for neoliberal ideologies, extol the individual. You know, you get a thing that you'll even get some educated persons who come through universities tell you, look, you don't need trade unions. That trade unions they disturb the free market, that they distort labor supply and demand. They tell you that you don't need political parties, that what you need is just to get the right people, the bright people, the technocrats, and let them run things. Well, there was a time in this region when there was no party government, no party politics. It's called colonialism. There was one party, the colonial government. And there is this, it's very often difficult to defeat and roll back this atomized individualistic approach. And the digital colonialism facilitates it. You know, everybody is an expert on social media, and you know, they go there, sometimes they just act out their own frustrations, but they have a platform on which they can do it. And you're finding it difficult to build a solidarity among peoples. You see it reflected in many countries across the region, where people don't even want to go and vote. It's not that they don't feel that government will deliver anything. It's just that they have an individualistic approach. They say any government which is there, I will do my thing and I will get through. And it is an ideological thing which we have to fight against. And I'm always struggling with it in my country, and I read on it, I try to understand it, and get people interested in doing work together. Because frankly speaking, if you have a society of atomized individuals, what will follow eventually is that they would be like an atomized individual would be like an atom inside a physicist's laboratory, easily to be manipulated by the physicists. And in the social laboratory, in our society, in our politics, they'd be craving for a Deus ex machina, some god coming from outside, somebody hovering. And we saw, and globalization itself fractures the kind of bonds. And we end up with Trump and worse, Bolsonaro. It's around us, you know. So this thing comes from in my view, it's the Bolsonaro and Trump are not really the problems. They're only they pull this thing together. And when the individuals have difficulties, there's always somebody else fault, but there's no sustained following. I mean, in the case of the United States with Trump, he sought to mobilize these individuals through Twitter, and he couldn't sustain, and he will not be able to sustain a following to do anything serious. It would just be a movement of grievances, which would be very difficult in order to get things done. With everything, just grievances. And I think that is not just a thing that we not There's not enough solidarity in respect of CARICOM or anything like that. It's a wider phenomenon, in my view.
Yeah. We have a question sort of thinking out of that from Nathaniel Williams. And Nathaniel Williams has said, the Caribbean is a melting pot of ethnic and racial diversities. Simultaneously, we are seeing a surge in ethnic and racial discord globally with its consequential negative impact. Prime Minister, is the Caribbean professional education and sociocultural education comparatively making us one of the most peaceful regions in the world?
I think that is an area where we have the process of creolization, as I said, where we have moved from a cultural plural society in which each of the ethnic and racial or cultural sections, each of them had its own relatively distinct pattern of sociocultural integration. And to the extent that there was a central value, was that Europeanness and white Europeanness was the preferred value. And it was held together by force, by coercion. But we have moved through the years, and biology has helped us to move. The intermixing of peoples. Biology is a very interesting phenomenon. And so that you have no alternative really to be creolized, because it's happening in your households and all about. But we have been able, through the fever of history, to do this. And I always refer, and Nathaniel Williams, if he's in Ascension, I'm thinking about as once permanent secretary here in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The first man from the country, from the rural area. He's now a pastor. First man he's now retired, first man from the rural area to become permanent secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here. But our Caribbean metaphorically has evolved as a veritable symphony. We are the songs of the indigenous peoples, the Kalinago, the Garifuna, the Amerindians. We are the rhythm of Africa, we are the melody of Europe, we are the chords of Asia, and we are the homegrown lyrics of the Caribbean. And like all symphonies, we do have dissonances, but we have processes, formal and informal, to take care of these dissonances. So Nato is quite correct that we end up with greater tolerance and peace and harmony comparatively. And we have something here valuable to teach the world. And I must say that many of our sociologists have helped us to understand this. Many of the researchers, Lloyd Bess, well, Lloyd Bess too, but Lloyd Brathwaite and R.T. Smith and M.G. Smith and Orlando Patterson, who's now in the United States, and Don Harris is a political economist who is the father of Kamala Harris, a Jamaican, now Professor Emeritus, I think, at Princeton or Stanford. They have helped us to understand this phenomenon. And by and large, too, we have not had political leaders who seek to go for any space like this. I mean, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for instance, persons who follow the politics early on, there were some British advisors to the opposition here who told them that one of the lines you have to run against Ralph is that you need a black man to be prime minister. Ralph is a red-skinned man. And I just simply say, well, you know, the truth of the matter is this, is that we do have what Frantz Fanon calls black skin, white mask, which in our context we say is a roast breadfruit, white inside and black outside, and that the history of people's relationship, they know you work and so on. And but nobody, you can't sustain that as a space in our politics. because the people themselves have reached a level of development that they wouldn't allow this. Now and again, I see it happening in Trinidad and in Guyana. And sometimes some small ethnic groups try to even fuel it. Because if in Trinidad, you have a smaller ethnic group outside of the African or Indian quote unquote political tribes, they may try to let them play one against the other so that they can hold the balance. And we have to be alert to all of those things. But I don't see much of a space for that kind of intolerance on ethnic grounds anymore in our region, even though there's some residues from yesteryear.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We have a question from Martin Williams from neighboring Grenada.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Good night. Good night. Comrade Ralph, how are you doing? It's good to hear you.
All right, my brethren.
All right. Question. I have a quote in my office taken from you about 2 years ago in relation to CARICOM conference where you use the term learned helplessness. And I also did I got in touch with I think it's Dr. Eric Williams in 1943 when he spoke of the inner plantation. We see a decrease in the expenditure designated to education, higher education in particular, where we, in the smaller islands, for example, don't seem to know what's going on. And the education is still on the historical path, notwithstanding the many developments we have had. All right, so how do you see, what can we do? Because the education has become so political, where the number of votes count so much, that we seem to want to, the politicians seem to want to please everyone to get votes at the risk of the future, the role of higher education, quality higher education in the future of our social and historical economical development, sustainable development. Yes. What are your thoughts on that?
May I just, I have in fact used the word learned helplessness, but I would say that I didn't coin it. I met it first in a book written by a British political economist called Charles Leadbeater, somewhere in the middle of his book. And it jumped out at me and I've used it and maybe I have popularized it, but that's where I don't want to claim paternity for something, but I know what you're talking about. A lot of people who teach at universities do not sufficiently address problem solving. Many do, but some do not. And we have to make sure that we study particular problems in our own context. You take, for instance, we had a major meltdown post-2008 with the issue of private debt bringing real pain and hardship to people through the collapse of CLECO and BICO. No person at the university has done any research on what transpired with CLECO BICO yet. And no one, to the best of my knowledge, has offered any solution, any idea as to how to get out of the challenges. We have had to do it at the political level with our public servants who have done a remarkable job in analyzing and finding some solutions. We have, I give other examples. We have, if you go and bananas, the banana industry is critical for the Windward Islands and Jamaica. for a long time, and for the Windward Islands in particular, and particularly Dominica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines. But you'll find very little serious work done on bananas and its marketing. You would not find, now that the banana industry has collapsed, you wouldn't find any analysis by anyone out of university about the environmental degradation caused by banana cultivation, particularly when you had a lot of subsidies and you go above the 1,000-foot contour to plant, and therefore you have soil erosion, and you're using the spray which kills the butterflies, and the non-biodegradable plastic in which you put the sleeve in which you put the bananas, and you're washing them, and the sleeves go down into the river, the plastic, and go to the sea and kill the turtles and so on. Now, the question of, we were in partnership with Europe, with Britain for quite a while with bananas. And now banana, the market, free trade brought that subsidized industry to an end. And we are left holding the bag with this problem, the environmental degradation caused by bananas. In fact, in my country, I argue that bananas, though it has been quite profitable for persons while it lasted with the subsidies, caused far more environmental degradation than the growing of ganja illegally in the hills where they cut down forests, and you have degradation through that. But we don't have studies of these things. So the university has to do a lot more specific research and problem solving. And therefore we will find less learned helplessness, because truly speaking, we are not a people of lamentations. We are not constructed that way. We believe very seriously that morning by morning new mercies we see. All that we need thy hand has provided, great is thy faithfulness. Once you hold that proposition dear to you, you can't be a lamentations man or woman. So the people themselves don't have a sense of learned helplessness, but some of the intellectual class and increasingly a number of journalists, including citizen journalists, particularly some who reside outside of the Caribbean, but with Caribbean roots. And they write a lot of things which don't make a great deal of sense and don't have any practical application to solve problems and so on and so forth. And it is true that politicians do from time to time pander. But there is a particular breed of politicians. I mean, I know what you're talking about, but in my case, I could tell you something. I am not ever afraid of losing quote unquote power. For the simple reason, well, I tell you that I have satisfied myself early that power is largely illusory. You have to do things. A man who is prime minister in anywhere, he has to work with people to get things done. If he thinks he has power to command things, I can't command yams to grow. I can't command fish to be caught. These are activities which have to be done in solidarity with other people. And I have developed a perspective that he who fears the loss of power tends to lose it swiftly. He who fears not tends to hold it longer, because ordinary people see whether you are prepared to stand your ground and do things what you think are right. If you get it wrong, well, they kick you out. That's the nature of the business. That's the game. That's what you get into. But if you decide to go and pander to people, You ain't leading, you're following. So that's how I'd answer you, my brother Williams, my brother Martin.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you, comrade.
We're coming to the end of the webinar, and I had said that we were not taking any more questions, but there was one question that came from Anita Peters Morris of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I think I have to allow it. And Renita has said, Prime Minister Gonzalez, given the current pandemic and a move to online learning by many Caribbean institutions, how can educational institutions adjust to accommodate this new mode of teaching?
Well, we are having more and more of it taking place, and we are seeing that it can be done. And we have, but at the same time, there are limitations to it. The University of West Indies, they have a lot of programs at the universities, our schools do it. We have provided the requisite devices for our students, all our students, so that you can do online teaching and learning. But there are some programs which you have to be instructed hands-on. You can't learn, I don't think you can learn to pull teeth by reading it in a book. I'm just simplifying it in the sense of dentists. And you can't learn from a book how to conduct a simple surgery like taking out somebody's appendix. So there are limitations. Even people will tell me you can teach that on a video, but really you need somebody there hands-on with you, so that it has its limitations. But the problem with face-to-face, the problem with the virtual teaching and learning is that it exacerbates the division between those who are economically more advantaged and those who are disadvantaged in terms of the accommodation you have in your house, whether the internet connection is there properly, the electricity, the kind of device you have, and so on. How is the home overcrowded? You know, and in any event, people need to have people need to have a certain, young people need to have a solidarity with one another and build a certain Caribbeanness. I mean, for instance, a lot of my friends, I personally, they're from Trinidad and Tobago. The friendship that Patrick Manning and I developed came through university. We played in the same steel band side. You don't get that by staying in, Patrick's going to university in Trinidad to do geology, and I doing open campus in political economy or economics or government or anything. No. Bruce Golden was in my class. You know that my year, 1969, was a pretty good year. We provided 3 prime ministers, 2 of them of real quality, Patrick Manning and Bruce Golden. The jury is very much out on the 3rd one. But you know, it doesn't mean, longevity doesn't mean that you're the best of the lot, you know. It only means you're a survivor. But seriously, you know, there's that dimension to it too. So Renita has raised an important question, and it contains the possibilities, and the virtual education clearly contains possibilities and limitations. One of my staff members here, very good young lady, she did her first 2 years in business at the open campus. And I said to her, you should go to university, go on the campus and experience campus life. Meet some people from the rest of the Caribbean and so on. It's important to build these links. So we have to work out in some way these things, rather than do it as we are doing it in an ad hoc manner.
And
Renita, incidentally, that's She has come from, she's also a child of the education revolution. She's an assistant secretary in the Ministry of Tourism. She's a PhD candidate, doing it partly by distance. She's come from a rural village, a poor family, and she's going places. Again, education.
And I think that's a fitting note on which to end this evening's webinar. And for me to, on behalf of the board and management of CanCate, give the vote of thanks. The board and management of CanCate would like to thank the Honorable Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for the presentation today. Dr. Gonsalves, you have led us to reflect on our history and our culture and the impact on the development of education systems in the region, and also to recognize that we are making history every day so that we continue to shape our education system by our culture and by our social interaction. We also join you in paying tribute to our ancestors and those who through great sacrifice would have brought the present to us, as we now prepare and take our responsibility to pass on the future to the next generation. So we would like to thank you, Dr. Gonsalves, and to extend, as you continue to be one of the visionary leaders of the Caribbean.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I'd also like to thank Dr. Roslyn Ambrose. Our education system in the Caribbean and the Caribbean on the whole continues to produce competent individuals who take positions of leadership throughout our countries. We want to recognize Dr. Roslyn Ambrose, herself a medical professional, a medical doctor by profession, but she's also the current chair of the National Accreditation Board of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And Dr. Ambrose is certainly one of the eminent professionals in our region. And so, Dr. Ambrose, we thank you for your introduction of the presenter tonight, but we also thank you for what you've contributed to St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the Caribbean through your profession. We'd also like to thank the President of CanCate, Mr. Floyd, for his leadership of CanCate and for organization of the webinar, and also the board and management of CanCate for their contribution to this event. Finally, and by no means least, we would like to thank the present and past staff of the National Accreditation Board of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and in particular to mention Mrs. Decima Alexander Hamilton. Mrs. Decima Alexander Hamilton has been for many years the face of the National Accreditation Board of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And she has done a tremendous job as a dedicated employee. And in her own right, she's been a leader in terms of the development of quality assurance in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And we'd like to recognize that and to thank her. She stays in the background a lot, but we'd like to thank her for the role that she has played, and also the role that she would have played in organizing the CanCate conference that should have taken place in St. Vincent and the Grenadines last year. In closing, I would like to say that the CanCate conference is on in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It didn't happen in 2020. We don't know if it's going to happen in 2021, but we are sure that the next CanCate conference and annual general meeting will be held in the beautiful islands of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So to all the participants, we thank you for being here this afternoon, for the questions you've asked, for the comments you've shared. We've gotten very positive feedback on Dr. Gonsalves' presentation, and it's left just to ask you to please complete the evaluation of the webinar. You would have seen the form pop up on the screen. Can you please complete the evaluation so that the organization gets feedback that they can use? So once again, Dr. Gonsalves, thank you. Participants, all Caribbean friends across the region,